welcome back to another 10-minute D. Rich Bible Hour. I'm your host, D. Rich. Today's subject is going to be on what I call Science-ology. Science-ology is not the necessarily the religion. It has nothing to do with L. Ron Hubbard or, different layers of alien invasion, that sort of thing. More or less, Science-ology is the idea that one can shut down all theological arguments with this idea of science. More specifically, this word that's been being floated around called falsification. Most people, the way they use it is if something can't not be falsified, or if there's no way to prove it wrong, it is no longer a valid argument. That's not how the term is used or how it was coined by Karl Popper. He used it in conjunction with this theory of, or actually it's a philosophy of science. It was all about the purity of science. Karl's idea was that if a theory or an idea could not be vetted by the scientific method, it wasn't science. Meaning it was it had to do with one of the other disciplines. There are many other disciplines, intellectual pursuits besides science, some of which, but are not limited to, recorded history, things like spelling, grammar, poetry, music, theology, even topography, geography. None of those things require the use of science. I mean, you don't have to have the use of the scientific method to play a song. You don't have to have the use of the scientific method to read about Washington crossing the Delaware. You don't have to do experiments on how he got across in order to vet the historical accuracy of our U.S. history. And that's the idea. Karl was trying to limit the cast of what was considered science, or because in his day, a lot of people were trying to drag other subject matters into the realm of science. Karl referred to that as pseudoscience or not science, and what he was trying to do was narrow the disciplines down to science, or of science, down to three major subject matters. And if you want to know what those are, you can Google them, or read his work on the philosophy of science. I'm not really here to argue it, but what I'm trying to bring to the forefront and to knowledge of people is the idea that just because someone uses the idea of falsification, or a theological premise can't be falsified, doesn't make it an invalid premise, or doesn't make it an invalid theory. It just means it's not a part of science. Okay, theology is its own branch of study. It has its own checks and balances. You have hermeneutics, you have exegesis, you have within those checks and balances, you have translation, you have history, you have etymology, you have all sorts of other things that prove out what theology is, and to the idea that theology is a junk degree. Well, Harvard was based on obtaining that particular degree, and it's still one of the more prestigious schools you can go to get a degree in theology. So is Yale, so is Princeton. All of the major Ivy League schools still offer degrees in theology to one degree or another. It is its own field of study, okay, and it is a legitimate field of study. All you're saying, though, whenever someone uses the word, this is not where's the falsification, or this can't be falsified, it doesn't mean anything. It just means this is not science. Well, duh. Science is secluded. It only measures what can be observed. God can't be observed, so there's another field of study behind that, and that being theology. And all falsification is saying is, this isn't science. Yeah, well, we know theology isn't science. Just like we know music isn't science. We know poetry isn't science. We know history isn't science. Or doesn't need science to work. Yes, you can scientifically examine history. You can scientifically examine poetry. But again, the field itself does not need science to work, and neither does theology. Again, theology being its own study. That's something to think about.